My brother-in-law falsely accused me, and my parents kicked me out without listening. But my grandfather left me a massive inheritance, and the truth about who lied left them all destroyed. I'm 23 years old, studying psychology at university, and honestly, I never thought my own family would do something like this to me. You know when you think you know people, that you trust them because they're your blood, and suddenly everything explodes in your face and you realize you didn't know anything? Well, that happened to me like 2 years ago, right before my final exams of the semester, and I still sometimes wake up at night thinking about how my life completely changed in a matter of hours. I guess I should start by explaining what my family was like before all this. My parents were always very strict, like the type who worry too much about what the neighbors will say and if the house is perfectly organized when visitors come. My dad worked in finance, always dressed in a suit, even on weekends sometimes, and my mom was an elementary school teacher, but at home she acted like she was the director of our lives. I have an older sister, Rebecca, who is basically the golden child of the family. 6 years older than me, she always did everything perfectly, got the best grades, married young to a guy named Steven who worked in real estate and seemed to have it all figured out. I, on the other hand, was more relaxed. I liked going out with friends, studied psychology instead of something practical, like my parents wanted, and I had a boyfriend, Alex, who was studying in another city. Nothing out of the ordinary, but I clearly wasn't the perfect ideal that Rebecca represented. My grandparents, especially my grandfather, were always my refuge. They lived like half an hour from our house, in a beautiful house that Grandpa built with his own hands like 40 years ago. Grandpa was a retired carpenter, one of those wise old men who really listens to you and gives you advice without judging. My grandma was sweet, cooked amazing food, and always had the door open for me. When things got tense at home, which was often because my parents constantly compared me to Rebecca, I would go to my grandparents and they made me feel like it was okay to be myself, that I didn't have to be a perfect copy of my sister. Everything started falling apart on a Thursday night. I think it was November, like 3 weeks before my finals. I was in my room studying for a neuropsychology exam. I had the following Monday, totally focused with my notes and my music. When my mom burst through the door, she didn't even knock, and she had a face I'd never seen before. Like, she was red, with the veins in her neck bulging. And I thought maybe something serious had happened. An accident or something. But no, turns out she had her phone in her hand and she yelled at me, "I need you to explain these messages to me right now." I was super confused, like, what messages? What was she talking about? I turned down the music and asked her what was wrong. And she started reading me supposed messages between Steven and me, where I was supposedly flirting with him, saying inappropriate things to him, basically seducing him according to those messages. I froze because I had never sent anything like that to Steven. In fact, I barely talked to him. I mean, yeah, he was my brother-in-law. I saw him at family dinners and events, but we never had a close relationship or anything. I would say hello, how are you? And that's it. I tried to explain that to my mom, but she wouldn't let me talk. She kept yelling about how I dared to do that to my sister, that I was shameless, that I had completely disappointed her. Then my dad arrived. You know, because with my mom screaming, it could probably be heard throughout the whole house, and he was furious too. He told me that Steven had shown them screenshots of the messages, that he himself had gone to talk to them because he was very uncomfortable with my behavior and didn't know how to handle it. The thing is, I knew something was very wrong there. Those messages didn't exist. I had never sent them, but my parents had already made their decision. They didn't care to hear my side. They didn't want to see my phone to verify that I didn't have those messages in my history. Nothing. My dad gave me an ultimatum right there. He said you have two options. Either you admit what you did and apologize to your sister and Steven, or you leave this house right now. I was crying, like I couldn't even breathe well from the shock, and I tried to defend myself. I told them to check my phone, to call my carrier, whatever was necessary to prove that I was innocent. But my dad just yelled that he wasn't going to tolerate liars in his house, and my mom said how was it possible that I kept denying it when they had proof. I think that was the first time in my life that I really understood that my parents didn't know me at all. I mean, if they really knew me, if they knew who I am as a person, they never would have believed something like that. But they already had their narrative built up in their heads. I was the problematic daughter who didn't meet their expectations, and Rebecca was the perfect one who would never do anything wrong. So obviously I had to be the guilty one. In that moment, with my dad yelling at me to get out, I made a decision. I told him, "Fine, I'm leaving, but someday you're going to discover the truth and you're going to have to live with this." I started packing my things. Basic clothes, my university books, because I had finals in 3 weeks, my laptop, everything that fit in my big suitcase and my backpack. My mom stood at my bedroom door watching me pack. And I hoped that at some point she would realize this was crazy, that she would stop me. But no, she just looked at me with that disappointed face that made me feel like garbage. I left that house around 11 at night with my suitcases and without knowing exactly where to go. I called Alex first. He was in his city, which was like 4 hours away, and when I told him what had happened, he offered to come get me immediately. But I told him no, that it was almost midnight, and he had class early the next day. Then I called my grandma, and she didn't even hesitate. She told me, "Come here right now. Your grandpa is going to come get you." I waited on the corner of my house because I didn't want my parents to see me standing there like begging to come back. And like 20 minutes later, my grandpa arrived in his old truck. He didn't ask me questions. He just helped me load the suitcases and told me everything is going to be okay. Mija. When we got to their house, my grandma was waiting for me with hot tea and cookies, as if she knew I needed something comforting. That's when I completely broke down. I told them the whole story while crying. I showed them my phone. I explained that those messages were made up, that someone had fabricated them. My grandpa believed me immediately. He told me, "I know what kind of person you are, and this doesn't make sense." My grandma too. She hugged me and told me to stay with them as long as I needed. That night, I slept in the guest room that had always been kind of like my second room, because I spent a lot of weekends there when I was younger. The following days were horrible. I tried to focus on studying for my finals, but it was impossible. My mind was somewhere else all the time, thinking about why Stephen had done this, what he gained by lying about me, and why my parents had believed his version without even giving me the benefit of the doubt. Alex drove those 4 hours to come see me that weekend, and honestly, his support was the only thing that kept me somewhat sane. My grandparents were also incredible. They never made me feel like a burden. They prepared food for me, gave me space to study, and my grandpa even helped me organize my notes, because I was so scattered I couldn't even order my thoughts. Like a week after I left, my dad showed up at my grandparents' house. I was at university taking an exam when it happened, but my grandma told me about it later. He arrived furious, knocking on the door like he was going to knock it down, and when my grandpa opened it, my dad started yelling at him about how he dared to give me refuge when I had done something so horrible. My grandpa, who was the calmest man in the world but didn't let anyone push him around, told him that he knew his granddaughter and knew she was innocent, and that the real shame was that my parents had thrown me out without even investigating the situation. My dad responded that if they supported me, then he didn't want to know anything about them either, to forget they had a son, and he left, leaving the door wide open. That destroyed my grandparents, especially my grandpa. He and my dad had a complicated relationship, never super close but not bad either, and now his own son was telling him to forget about him. My grandma cried that night. I heard her from my room, and I felt so guilty for being the cause of all this. But my grandpa came to talk to me the next day and told me, "Mija, this isn't your fault. Your dad is blinded now, but someday he's going to see the truth." I wanted to believe him, but the truth is I wasn't so sure. I managed to finish my finals, not with the grades I expected, but considering the circumstances, it wasn't too bad. Winter break was weird. Normally I spent it with my whole family, but that year it was just with my grandparents, and Alex came to spend Christmas with us. My grandparents did everything possible to make it special, but there was a void there. A sadness that we all felt but no one mentioned. Rebecca sent me a message around those dates. I think it was like 2 days before Christmas, telling me she was very disappointed in me, that she couldn't believe what I had tried to do with her husband, and that she didn't want to hear from me again. That hurt more than I expected, because Rebecca and I, although we weren't super close because of the age difference, had always had a decent sister relationship. A new semester started and I tried to continue with my normal life, but nothing felt normal. I lived with my grandparents, went to university, studied, but there was always this dark cloud over me. Alex and I were still together. He came to visit me every 2 or 3 weeks, and my grandparents adored him. My grandpa even joked, saying that Alex was a better son-in-law than Stephen, and that made me laugh a little despite everything. Then, in March, like 4 months after all the drama, my grandpa had a heart attack. It was super sudden. I mean, he was in the garden, fixing some plants, and collapsed. My grandma called the ambulance, and I ran out of university when she told me. But by the time I got to the hospital, it was too late. Grandpa had died. He was 74 years old, had been a healthy man his whole life except for high blood pressure that he controlled with medication, and suddenly, he was gone. I can't even describe the pain of losing my grandpa at that moment. He had been my support in Ottav, the worst moment of my life. He had defended me when no one else did. He had given me a home when my own family had thrown me out, and now he was gone. My grandma was devastated, obviously. They had been married for like 50 years. I tried to be strong for her, but inside I was destroyed. What made me angriest was that my parents didn't even come to the funeral. My grandma notified them. I mean, it was their father-in-law, part of the family, but they said they were out of town and couldn't get back in time. Later, I found out from a cousin that they saw them on social media at the beach, literally on vacation while we were burying Grandpa. That made me realize the type of people my parents really were, that they could be so cold and calculating when it suited them. The funeral was small but nice. Grandpa's friends came, some neighbors, family who actually cared. I gave a speech where I talked about how Grandpa had been my hero, my protector, and how I was never going to forget what he did for me. Alex was there holding me the whole time because I could barely stand. Like 2 weeks after the funeral, the doorbell rang at my grandma's house on a Saturday afternoon. I opened the door and I almost had a heart attack when I saw my parents standing there with fake, concerned faces. My mom tried to hug me, but I took a step back, and my dad said we could talk. I let them in because my grandma was in the living room and I didn't want to make a scene. But inside, I was boiling. They sat on the couch, very serious. And my dad started with this thing about we've been thinking a lot, and we believe it's time to forgive and forget. Family is the most important thing. My mom added that they missed me and wanted me to come back home, that we could overcome this together. I looked at them, unable to believe what I was hearing. I mean, they had thrown me out of the house. They had accused me of something horrible that I didn't do. They had turned their backs on their own parents for supporting me. They didn't even come to my grandpa's funeral. And now they were showing up saying they wanted to forgive me? I asked my dad directly. Forgive me for what exactly? I didn't do anything wrong. He got uncomfortable and said, well, we all make mistakes, but the important thing is to move forward. In that moment, I realized that this had nothing to do with forgiving me or reconciling with me. This was about something else. My grandma, who knew them better than anyone, asked them very calmly, and what's the reason for this sudden need for reconciliation? My mom started stammering something about how Grandpa's death had made them reflect on the importance of family. But my grandma didn't believe them for a second. She told them, if you're coming for what I think you're coming for, you're going to be surprised. My parents looked at each other, like saying we've been caught, and my dad asked my grandma about Grandpa's will. That's when everything became clear. They weren't coming to reconcile with me, they were coming for the inheritance. Grandpa had been a hard-working man his whole life. He had saved a lot of money. He had the house, which was worth a lot because it was in a good area, and he also had some properties in Florida that he had bought years ago. My parents, especially my dad, had always been interested in Grandpa's money, although they never said it openly. And now that he had died, they came to claim their part. My grandma got up, went to her room, and came back with some papers. She told my parents that if they were so interested in the will, she could tell them exactly what Grandpa had left. My parents got kind of nervous but tried to hide it, like, oh well, it's just to know how things were. My grandma started reading, the house is for me. Obviously. I lived here with him for 50 years. The savings, which were like $300,000, are for my granddaughter, because her grandfather wanted to make sure she had a stable future after everything she suffered because of her own family. My parents' faces were epic. My mom went pale and my dad turned red, like you could see the veins in his neck again. My dad started saying that couldn't be, that it was unfair, that he was his son and deserved part of the inheritance. My grandma very calmly responded that Grandpa had made it very clear in his will that the reason he wasn't leaving them anything was because they had thrown out their granddaughter for no reason and had turned their backs on their own parents. Basically, Grandpa had punished them from the grave for what they did to me. My parents stood up furious and said they were going to fight the will in court, that this wasn't going to stay like this. My grandma told them to do what they wanted, but that the will was solid and they had witnesses. They left slamming the door. They didn't even say goodbye. I sat there processing everything. My grandpa had left me his savings. I couldn't believe it. I mean, I knew he loved me, but I never imagined something like this. My grandma hugged me and told me that Grandpa always knew I was innocent and wanted to make sure I was protected. Sure enough, my parents hired a lawyer and fought the will. The process lasted like 6 months and it was horrible. I had to testify, explain the whole situation of why they had thrown me out. It was like reliving all the trauma. But Charles, Grandpa's lawyer and lifelong friend, handled everything perfectly. He had all the necessary evidence, including a letter that Grandpa had written explaining his reasons for distributing the inheritance the way he did. Then something happened that none of us expected. Charles explained to the court that Grandpa had left a special clause in the will, like a trap for anyone who tried to fight it. If anyone contested the will and lost, they automatically inherited the Florida properties, but with one condition: they had to take responsibility for all the debts associated with those properties. Turns out the Florida properties, which my parents thought were worth a lot, were actually drowning in debt. Grandpa had had problems with a partner who scammed him years ago, and those properties had overdue mortgages, back taxes, and legal claims all over the place. Basically, they were worth less than zero. When the judge read this in court, my parents froze. Their lawyer explained that if they went ahead with the case and lost, which was very likely, they were going to be stuck with those properties and all the debts, which added up to like $500,000. They tried to withdraw the case, but it was too late. The process was underway. The judge ended up dismissing their appeal, confirmed that the will was valid, and assigned them the Florida properties with all their debts. My parents were ruined. They literally had to sell their house to start paying off the property debts. They moved to a small apartment, and from what I heard later, they had to take out loans and were on the verge of declaring bankruptcy. Part of me felt bad for them because at the end of the day they were my parents, but another part felt that this was what they deserved for everything they did to me. The following months were weird. I kept living with my grandma, using the inheritance money to pay for my university and save for the future like Grandpa would have wanted. Alex and I got more serious. He got to know my grandma better and she adored him. My life was starting to stabilize again, although the hole left by my parents and Rebecca was always there. Rebecca sent me several messages trying to make peace. She said she didn't know anything about the inheritance issue, that our parents had acted on their own. But I didn't believe her. And besides, she had never believed me when I told her I was innocent, so why should I forgive her now? My parents also tried to contact me a couple of times. I think they hoped I would give them money to help them with their financial problems, but I didn't respond. My grandma told me I had no obligation to help them after everything they did to me, and she was right. Then, like a year after all the will drama, Rebecca showed up at my grandma's house. She was crying, like really devastated, and asking to talk to me. I honestly didn't want to see her, but my grandma said to at least hear her out. Rebecca came in and completely broke down. She told me she had discovered that Stephen was cheating on her. She had found messages on his phone with another woman, photos, all the evidence. And when she confronted him and looked through his phone more carefully, she discovered something that shocked me. Stephen had his mistress's number saved under my name on his phone. That meant the supposed messages I had sent to Stephen, the ones my parents showed me 2 years ago, weren't mine. They were from his mistress, but he had changed the contact name to my name so that if Rebecca checked his phone, she would. I think I was the one writing inappropriate things to him. Stephen had literally used me as a scapegoat to hide his affair, and my parents had fallen for his trap perfectly. Rebecca was destroyed, not only because her husband had cheated on her, but because she realized she had accused me unjustly, that she had destroyed our relationship because of Stephen's lies. She asked for my forgiveness, crying, saying she was so sorry, that she should have believed me, that she had been an idiot for trusting Stephen instead of her own sister. I was furious and relieved at the same time. Furious because this confirmed what I had said from the beginning, that I was innocent, and relieved because finally someone in my family believed me. I told Rebecca that I appreciated her apology, but that I needed time to process all this. She understood. She asked me if she could stay with Grandma for a few days, because she didn't want to go back to the house with Stephen. My grandma, who always had a huge heart, said yes. Rebecca moved into the guest room and started divorce proceedings. My parents found out that Stephen had cheated on Rebecca and, According to what Rebecca told me, they went to the house and literally kicked Stephen out. My dad told him to never come near his family again. It's ironic, right? How they defended Stephen when supposedly I was the bad one, but when they discovered he was the real cheater, then they threw him out. My dad even called my grandma, not to apologize to me directly because I suppose that was too much for his pride. But he told my grandma that he had made a mistake, that he shouldn't have believed Stephen without investigating more, and that he accepted he wasn't going to receive anything from Grandpa's inheritance because he understood that was his punishment for what he did to me. It was weird to hear that from my grandma. Part of me wanted my dad to come and apologize to me personally, to admit face to face that he was wrong. But another part of me understood that was his limit, that my dad was too proud to do something like that, and that this acknowledgement through my grandma was the most I was going to get from him. Rebecca and I started rebuilding our relationship little by little. It wasn't easy or quick. There was a lot of accumulated pain and distrust, but she was really trying to make amends. She told me about her divorce process, which was a mess because Stephen didn't want to sign the papers, but eventually he had to give in. Rebecca stayed living with my grandma because she had nowhere to go and didn't want to go back to our parents. The truth is, having Rebecca there was weird at first, but over time we started having real sister conversations, something we had never had before. My grandma was happy to have both her granddaughters with her. She said that's what Grandpa would have wanted, for us to be together and taking care of each other. She even started talking about her own will, half joking, half serious, saying she was going to leave the house to Rebecca because she needed it more than me, and that I already had Grandpa's savings. Rebecca started crying when she heard that and told Grandma she didn't have to do anything for her, but Grandma insisted that was fair. My parents made some attempts to reach out to me. My mom sent me a text message like 6 months after all the drama with Stephen, saying she wanted to talk, that she was sorry for what had happened. I responded with something short, like, "Thanks for the message, but I'm not ready to have a conversation yet. I don't know if I'll ever be ready." Honestly, what they did to me was too big, too painful, and even though they now know the truth, I can't just forget that they threw me out of their house, that they accused me without evidence, that they let their hatred toward me blind them completely. Alex and I are still together. We've been together for like 4.5 years now. He finished his degree and got a job at a good company in his city, and we're looking at the possibility of me moving in with him when I finish my degree next year. My grandma tells me to do it, not to worry about her, that Rebecca is there to keep her company, and that I deserve to live my life. It makes me nostalgic to think about leaving my grandma's house, because this place became my real home, the place where I found refuge when I needed it most. I finished my psychology degree a few months ago. I graduated with honors, and my grandma, Rebecca, and Alex were there at the ceremony applauding me like crazy. My parents didn't go. I didn't invite them. Maybe it sounds cruel, but there are things that can't be repaired with simple apologies, and I think they understand that. Rebecca is better now. She got a job as an administrator at a dental clinic. She's doing therapy to process all the trauma from the marriage with Stephen and the guilt for how she treated me. We talk often, sometimes about deep things and sometimes just about stupid stuff like Netflix series. We're never going to have the relationship we could have had if none of this had happened, but we're building something new, something more honest. Like 2 weeks ago, I went to the cemetery to visit Grandpa's grave. I told him everything that had happened, how his plan worked perfectly, how he protected me even after death. I thanked him for believing in me when no one else did, for giving me a home, for teaching me that real family is the one that supports you in the worst moments, not necessarily the one that shares your blood. I put flowers on his grave and sat there for a while, feeling his presence in some weird way. Life now is quiet, different from how I imagined it would be when I was 20, and thought I would have my whole family with me forever. But in a way, I have what's most important. I have my grandma who loves me unconditionally. I have Rebecca who finally understands who I am. I have Alex who has been with me through thick and thin. And I have Grandpa's memory that guides me when I don't know what to do. My parents are like ghosts now. They exist somewhere, but they're not part of my day-to-day, and I'm learning to be at peace with that. I don't know what's going to happen in the future. If someday I'm going to completely forgive my parents, if we're going to have some kind of relationship again, what I do know is that I'm not going to let the pain they caused me define who I am anymore. I'm building my own life, with the people who really value me, and that's enough for now.